Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, September 9th around here, and we have a packed show for you today, that is for sure. We're going to start talking about Texas heading up to Ann Arbor and just obliterating Michigan for about 4 quarters, well, 3.5 quarters, and then took their foot well off the gas towards the end of that game. Then we'll get into another just splattering. Tennessee over NC State 51-10, domination, and really sets up Tennessee for a really bright future under Josh Heupel, which we'll get into in that segment. Then we'll get into kind of a twofer. We'll get into Nebraska handling Colorado and 28-10 in that one. And then Iowa State staged a big-time comeback in the Cy-Hawk Trophy battle, 20-19 over Iowa. Just an incredible second half from Rocco back there. Then we'll get into some upsets. NIU just shocked Notre Dame this past weekend, going up to South Bend and getting a win. But some other Group of 5 teams had plenty to say about this weekend and got very, very close to doing the exact same thing. So we'll break those down as well. Then we'll get to a week 1 whip around. Everything else you need to know, especially with the top 25 teams, what we'll do today. And then we have plenty more to get to that we'll get to tomorrow. So tons of stuff, and it's going to take us a little bit longer than today, just today, to get to all of it. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat below that chat feature on the Sports Network page. Great way for you guys to just click on that, add any question, comment you'd like, and it'll pop up on the screen. We can have a fun back and forth here. Always good to have this be interactive, and that's what I want. Want this to be a little bit more interactive as we get further and further into the season, so utilize that if you'd like. And also, the GSMC Podcast.net page is still up and working if that's a little bit easier for you all, but sometimes that super chat is just a little bit easier to access. So, going to be an incredible couple of months here, so definitely join on the ride, get a little bit interactive here. Would love to get this more of a fan-driven show going forward. But let's get into this, because there was a domination that happened up in Ann Arbor this past weekend, and it was at the hands of the Longhorns to the Wolverines, and this one was a beatdown. There's really no other way to put it. And this one could have been much worse than it was, because Texas took their foot well off the gas pedal in the fourth quarter of this game and just kind of rode it out to the finish. Michigan made a couple of plays at the end to make it look a little bit better, including a couple of really good balls from Davis Warren down the stretch of this game that we can talk about here in a minute. But the story of the game, without a doubt to me, is the Texas O-line. They walked into this game with a level of aggression, with a level of intensity that I really haven't seen from Texas in quite some time. I think the Alabama game last year was right on that same level, but this was a game where they walked in and knew that if Michigan was going to beat them, it was going to be because they out-physicaled them. That was really the only way that Michigan was going to be able to get this one done, and they didn't even come close. This Michigan D-line with Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant got pushed around for a lot of the day. Now, they made their fair share of plays and forced Quinn Ewers out of the pocket. He just continued to make those plays when he did, but at the end of the day, when you give up 0 sacks and only 5 pressures to that defensive line, your offensive line had one of the best days of the entire team. And I think it's possible that they were the best unit for Texas throughout this game, and there were a lot of good units for Texas. For Michigan on the other side, or let's talk about Quinn Ewers here for a second, because it was his show on Saturday. There's no doubt about that. This kid went to work, and I talked about it last week. I said this is a game where you're going up against Wink Martindale. You're going up against the reigning national champions in their building. This is a chance to become a first-round prospect. There's no doubt in my mind that he is a first-round guy at this point. Now, it's a matter of battling for that number 1 spot, and Shedeur did not do himself any favors this week, which we'll get into in a couple of segments here. But at the end of the day, on the Michigan side, they have the same problems they did a week ago. This O-line is not in the place that it needs to be, especially if they're going to run that offense they did a year ago. Khalil Mullings is a great running back, and so is Donovan Edwards. The holes aren't there for them to be succeeding. Texas did a great job of closing a lot of those up, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, there was a mismatch when it came to Texas D-line, particularly the depth of that D-line and the O-line of Michigan, and it was clear and obvious because then you had to have Davis Warren pushing the ball downfield in a game that you did not want this way to go. So it's definitely a very, very impressive performance from Texas. Top to bottom, this is one of the best performances, if not the best performance I've seen from Steve Sarkisian Sarkisian's Texas team, and it comes with a lot of expectations now. Now you are the team that everyone's looking at to possibly win a national title, but as of right now, they're on just cruise control. They look absolutely in full control of what they're doing, and Michigan just looked lost for much of this game. But let's get into why Texas won in particular, and the biggest thing is game plan and coaching, no doubt about it. Steve Sarkisian had an interesting battle in this game. It was him against Wink Martindale, one of the most incredible and, experienced defensive coordinators in the entire football world. Sark decidedly won that battle. It was all over the place, this Michigan defense, and Texas took advantage of every single opening that they gave them. And it was incredible to watch the play calling go to work because Steve Sarkisian just had them in the palm of his hand for the vast majority of this game. There were tons of motions, there were different personnel groups, there was tons of confusing pre-snap stuff that Michigan's defense was just all types of confused about. And then on the defensive side of the ball, game planning, it was rather easy, right? You take away that run game, you put the ball in Davis Warren's hands, you get up early, which they did and very much helped them in this, and then you go to work. And then you kind of just wear this team down. Michigan went for 22 carries, 82 yards, not at all what they wanted to do in this game, and it forced them to pass the ball a lot more, and that's when Texas took advantage. Had 2 picks on Davis Warren, and it was really just one of those games where everything from start to finish went just about Texas' way, except for a holding penalty on the first drive, and even then it felt like the writing was on the wall that Texas was going to roll in this game after that first drive. In fact, in the first half, Texas ran 45 plays, 36 of them were in Michigan territory. They were all over Michigan from start to finish, at least in the first half, and then they took their foot off the gas pedal by a pretty aggressive margin in the second half and just kind of rode this one out to a victory. But the other part of this was physicality, and we talked about it with the O-line and the D-line playing really good football, but this Michigan D-line has 2 first-round talents without a doubt in Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. They got handled for a lot of this game. Kenneth Grant, there were a couple of plays where he just got outright pancaked by whether it was Hayden Connor or Jake Majors, might have been outright the best player on the football field this past weekend because the way he exploded off the ball was just incredible to watch throughout this game. But at the end of the day, this is a Michigan defensive line that is really good. There's no two ways about that. There's no argument to say, maybe they weren't as good as we thought they were. Now, the depth is not nearly where it needs to be, and that is the big time Achilles heel of this defensive line. But even when the front guys were in there, it was pretty much domination from this Texas offensive line, and it shows you just how far they've come in only a couple of years, where a couple of years ago they were outmatched pretty much every which way from Tuesday on that offensive line. But on the D-line, they did a great job of slowing down this tough running game for Michigan. I think it's one of those things where they knew what they had to do coming in. They knew that they were a group that a lot of people had questions about. They knew that they were going to be attacked early on in this game. They answered the bell and then some. There were so many guys rotating in, which was the difference in this game in a lot of ways. Texas had multiple guys to rotate in on the defensive line and the offensive line, although I don't think they utilized that too much, but Michigan just did. They don't have the guys on the back end of this team to really supplement some of the worries they have on the front end. So it's one of those things where Michigan last year, it was incredible team top end. It's not to say, this team, the starting 11 or starting 22 for Michigan last year wasn't incredible because it was off the charts awesome. What really made that team special, though, was the depth behind them. And now you just don't have that. Not nearly to the level that you had a year ago, and Texas took full advantage of that one. So this is one that could have gotten a lot uglier, and one of the big-time reasons is Quinn Ewers. He went to work in this game, and it was so impressive to watch him mature just in this game. I mean, you watch him from, if people want to go back and watch that Arkansas game in his first year, or go back and watch that Oklahoma State game in his first year, and then watch this one, you genuinely will believe that someone took his body. You would genuinely believe it's an entirely different person. It's a spirit that has taken over his body, and it's Tom Brady now, because the kid is so comfortable. The kid makes every single play that's right in front of them, and when a Michigan defense that can get you into trouble very quickly, He just made the play that was in front of him. He made the play that he needed to make, and then when one really needed to be made by him, man, did he make it. That throwing, that touchdown to Gunnar Helm to start the game, who also had might have been the player of the game outside of Quinn Ewers. Just incredible play from that tight end that they very much needed in this game because Michigan was just trying to take away everything upfield. He was just underneath and caught every single pass and had a really, really awesome day. But overall, the biggest thing for me was how he responded. There were multiple times, especially early on in this game, where Texas was just 3rd and 10, 3rd and 12, 3rd and 8, and then he made every pass. He made every single throw. They went 10 and 16 on third down throughout this game, and I would bet you that a lot of those third down stops came in the second half of this game when they were running the ball on third down when they could have passed the ball. So it's one of those things where every single thing you needed Quinn Ewers to do in this game, he did. There was not a beat miss, there was not a moment miss, and there was not something that he threw a ball and you felt nervous about where it was going. He was just on fire, and it put him in a position where now I'd have a hard time not putting him at least number 1 or number 2. We'll talk about who I think is number 1 in a couple of segments here, but he's one of those guys that just shot himself to the top of the Heisman candidacy, and he absolutely should, because just a remarkable performance from this kid on Saturday. Where does Michigan go from here? That's the big-time question I'll have for both of these teams real quickly here, and this one's tough because you look at this team, they don't have a true identity on offense. If your offensive line is not going to be as deep or is not as dominant as it was a year ago, you're not going to be able to run the ball as efficiently. Frankly, I think they have to get Alex Orji more involved in this offense. I think you have to be more dynamic running the ball. You have to give them more to think about on that defensive front rather than let's just collapse to the middle and then force Davis Warren to beat us with his arm. And then the other part of it is you still don't have a true wide receiver 1. You still don't have a guy that you can go to every single down and feel really confident in that. Samaj Morgan made some really good plays in this game, but at the end of the day, the majority of his yards were on that touchdown to Davis Warren in garbage time. So at the end of the day, they need someone on that outside. And right now, it looks like no one is even close to taking that realm. I think Samaj Morgan has a shot. I think Tyler Morris probably should have at this point, but has not. I think it's just one of those things where Michigan is in one of those positions where offensively, if it's not going to be Colston Loveland and it's not going to be this run game, you have no shot to be able to put up points against really any team, but especially the elite teams that you're going to have to beat throughout the season, including a USC game that's coming up here pretty soon. So there's a ton on the plate, but at the end of the day, the defense isn't as good as it was a year ago, particularly on the back end and in depth in general, but they are still very capable. Michigan's defense is going to keep them in a lot of these games because I would argue the Texas offense made them look a little bit worse than they are. Quinn Ewers was on fire. Steve Sarkisian was calling every right play, and it just looked incredible from that side of the ball. So I'm trying not to hold too much against this Michigan defense right now, but at the end of the day, they'll still be in a lot of games, but they got to figure out that quarterback position. I know a lot of Michigan fans have been calling for Jaden Davis to possibly take some reps. I don't hate the idea. As of right now, you don't have a lot going for you, and maybe the answer is the kid sitting on the bench right now. But we'll see what happens there, and we'll keep you updated as it does. But for Texas, go to work. That's the end-all, be-all after this game. This is the game that, launches you off. It was the same thing with Alabama a year ago, where now you're in a part of the season where things might have just gotten a little bit harder. This is a game where you get up for it. You know what you're going into. You know you want to win this game. You know how big of a deal this game is and everything in between. So it's not hard to get up for this game. It might be a little bit harder to get up for UTSA or for ULM in a couple of weeks. And then you got Mississippi State coming to town. More than anything, last year we saw Alabama fall to Texas in week 2. From there forward, Texas had a number of games that were very, very close, some that they hypothetically should have lost in some different circumstances, and they were able to get out wins. But in the SEC, those margins are even thinner, so they have to be very, very careful moving forward, because as great of a win as this is, and I think it's a lot better than some people are giving it credit for, I do think this is one of those things where you just got to make sure you don't get complacent. You got to make sure a Mississippi State team doesn't walk in there and really give you a run for your money. But then, huge props to Steve Sarkisian and his staff. I mean, we talk about how much Michigan lost, and Michigan lost just so much more than Texas did, to be totally fair. But Texas did get 11 guys drafted, lost their top 4 pass catchers, the best best defensive players, and defensive linemen on their team, lost the starting running back, starting right tackle. They lost a lot of guys and still found their way back to playing just elite level football. So as of right now, all system goes for Texas. They are in have everything in front of them to possibly go to a playoff, to possibly win a national title, but now it's time to really deliver. Now it's time to get past this big time game that everyone was looking forward to, and now it's time to execute. And we'll see what they can do over the next little bit, because last year it was a big time problem executing at the level they needed to down the stretch of that season. So it's going to be interesting to watch this team, but as of right now, dominating performance. And this Texas team, as good as last year's team was, this looks like a better, more complete team to me. So definitely a team that absolutely will have plenty to say about the college football playoff. But let's take our first break. We went a little bit long there, got a little bit into the weeds about Texas. But at the end of the day, let's take our first break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Tennessee just rolling over NC State, another dominating performance by a top 25 team. And it was an interesting one. So I want to break that one down right after this. So stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome. Excuse me. Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about an absolute splattering up in Ann Arbor, Texas getting that 131-12 against Michigan, and just a huge win for that program, and especially for Quinn Ewers, who might have just put himself into the first round of the NFL draft. But let's get to another splattering. Tennessee just went to work on NC State in this game, and it wasn't necessarily ugly from the get-go, which is kind of the funny thing about this game. It was one of those games that took a second to open up, but when it did, Tennessee took full advantage. It was absolute domination for much of this game, and Tennessee is for real. That is the biggest thing that everyone has to take away from this, because this was not a game that went the way that Tennessee thought it was going to go. If that was going to be the score, that was not going to be the box score that they were expecting. I can almost promise you that. So a really, really impressive game. I mean, they won this game by doing two things. They ran the ball really efficiently, and they played just suffocating defense against an offense that is going to give a lot of people problems. Now, maybe not the elite level SEC defense's problems, but they're going to give a lot of people in the ACC problems, and Tennessee made it look relatively easy to dominate this game. And the big time switch in this game, obviously, was that big time pick by, I'm blanking on his name, and I hate it because he's a walk-on. He deserves a scholarship. I'll leave it at that for the time being. But a remarkable play by him. NC State was down 3-10 at this moment, and they were driving down the field. I believe they were on the 15 or so of Tennessee. And then Grayson McCall misses Justin Jolie. They go the other way for a pick six, and this game just ends, essentially. This game just totally gets buried for NC State, and they didn't score an offensive touchdown in this game. It was really, really ugly. And overall, I think when you're Tennessee, the plain and simple of it is if I told you Nico Iamaleava was going to walk out there and throw 2 picks and just over 200 yards, you probably would have been a little bit worried about Tennessee even covering this spread. Well, they quadrupled the spread, so it was more than fine with Nico not necessarily playing his cleanest of football. They were still able to get a big-time win, and let's get into how they got this win, because it was really, really impressive to watch this team go to work. And the biggest thing was the line of scrimmage dominated this game. They had 249 rushing yards, 5.7 yards per carry for Tennessee. For NC State, 39 rushing yards and 1.4 yards per carry. I talked about it last week that Jordan Waters had to be a big factor in this game. He was not. Was very, very few heard from. So at the end of the day, this defensive line for Tennessee is so athletic, so deep. It's one of those teams that you just can't wait for a matchup like Bama or a matchup like Georgia, although Bama's offensive line has some troubles that we'll get into here in a second. But at the end of the day, this is a team that you cannot wait to see go up against Georgia in that offensive line, because they're so deep, they're so athletic on that D-line. It's going to be one of the best matchups of the entire year, regardless of the game. So this is one of those things that it was clear as day which team was more physical, which team was more dominant, bigger, stronger, faster, all of that stuff. It went Tennessee's direction. Really just dominating performances, particularly from those line of scrimmage players. And then they kept the wide receivers out of it. I talked about it last week. This was the only place that NC State had a decided advantage, at least in my mind. And it didn't look like that on Saturday. I mean, you have Concepcion, you have Noah Rogers, you have Justin Jolie. There should be places where you can take advantage of an inexperienced back end. They were not able to. Grayson McCall, 15 for 22, 104 yards, 1 pick, 4.7 yards per pass. Not going to be nearly good enough. And Kevin Concepcion took up over half of those passing yards with 53, and he was the leading receiver. So it was ugly. No two ways about that. And they did a great job keeping Concepcion under wraps, because that was the only way they were going to win this game, is get the ball out on the edge to these really athletic wide receivers and see if they can make a couple of plays out in space. They were not able to. Huge shout out to Boo Carter, who I thought played a really good game against some really, really tough circumstances, especially early on. Made some minor mistakes, but overall just played really, really good football, and just really impressed with that back end in general that I think still has some troubles, and I think still can get taken advantage of by the Georgias and some of the other teams around the SEC. But at the end of the day, a really, really good performance against a team that could have exploited your back end and was not able to. And then finally, the offensive game plan was just as clear as day. They had 44 carries, almost 250 yards on the ground, and it was one of those things where NC State did everything they could to stop that pass game, and they did a relatively good job. 2 picks from Nico, only 200 yards passing. That's about as good as you're going to get, frankly, from this Tennessee offense. But at the end of the day, they're going to be able to run the ball. They have a really good offensive line. Dylan Sampson's an absolute monster. I believe he went for over 100 yards. I don't have it right here, but he went for over 100 yards, needed a little bit on the ground, 60 yards rushing and a touchdown there. So they did enough. It wasn't about, beating NC State over the head with a ton of deep passes. It wasn't about, putting on a highlight reel show and getting Nico Iamaleava into the Heisman conversation. It was about winning this game, and man, did they. They absolutely dominated from start to finish, and a lot of it was just them saying, okay, you're going to drop 8 in coverage, which they did a ton in this game. We'll just run the ball at you, and we'll run it for 44 carries, almost 250 yards, and you guys will not have any chance to be able to win this one. I believe the difference in plays called in this game was something like Tennessee around 50 to NC State around 25. So NC State's one of those teams, they run the ball very, very slowly down the field. They kind of are a little bit monotonous at times. And I think that's the thing. If you can get up on NC State early, if you can put pressure on them early and make Grayson McCall be the guy that's going to make the plays down the stretch, you're in a good position. Because at the end of the day, NC State runs very slowly. They want to get the run game going. They're not a team that is going to be able to beat you over the top, at least all that often. So at the end of the day, that's the formula. Get out ahead of NC State really quickly, force the ball into Grayson McCall's hands, and then just let your guys on the back end feast. It's a very, very simple formula, but where they go from here, I think for NC State, this one really hurts, no doubt about it. I mean, you got beat down for 4 quarters in a game that, coming in, there were a lot of NC State fans that were looking at this as a turning point for the program, as a chance for them to beat a big-time SEC team and become a team that everyone's talking about for the playoff. That's obviously not how it went down, but at the end of the day, they still have a chance to do everything they want to do in this season. You know, there's still plenty to fix. That O-line needs to get a ton better because they have Clemson in a couple of weeks and also an NIU team that we'll talk about here in a bit. But at the end of the day, this team needs to find a run game. They need to find an O-line that's going to be consistent at the point of attack. And then the defense, I think, is going to be mostly fine, although that defensive line not necessarily playing the way that you want them to is worrisome. But at the end of the day, I think when you look at the game plan comparative to what NC State can do going forward against some teams, it's not going to be that type of game plan going forward. So I'm not super worried about the defense. I do have my worries, don't get me wrong, but I do think they're going to be able to be much better than they were in this game, and I think Tennessee is just one of those offenses that you can do your best to stop them. You're not going to do a very good job. I can almost promise you that. But on the Tennessee side, it's all systems go. It's the same thing with Texas in a lot of ways, where this team rocks. It's really hard to find a hole in this team, at least a big-time hole. Now, you can poke little holes here and there, and I think UGA might just be able to take advantage of those really small holes. But at the end of the day, they're a different team this year than they ever have been under Josh Heupel. This is a better team than there was in 2022. I think they have a better quarterback. They have a way better defense. The wide receivers, I think, are more talented and deeper than they were, although I don't know if there's a Jalen Hyatt on this team, but I do think there are plenty of really talented players that spread the ball out more often and make it even tougher on that side. And then on the defense, James Pierce Jr., Arian, Bryson Eason, these guys are just so dominant on that front seven that this back end that is inexperienced, that is young, that is still kind of learning the ropes, they have plenty of time and plenty of ability to make those plays, because if James Pierce Jr. is in your face, you're not going to make all that accurate of a throw. So at the end of the day, these two things work in tandem, and when your front seven is as good as Tennessee's front seven is, the back end's going to look a lot better than maybe it would if that front seven wasn't quite as dominant. So it's one of those things that you look at this game, there were so many different ways that I could convince you that Tennessee did not play well in this game. Whether it was, if I show you Nico's stat line, you would not think that Tennessee maybe even won this game, but at the very least did not win it by 41. I can tell you that. When you look at that stat line, it was really, really impressive that they were able to win, because at the end of the day, this is not what Tennessee has been. Now, don't get me wrong, Josh Heupel absolutely runs the ball, and that is the crux of his offense, as it is with a lot of elite play callers out there. But at the end of the day, it was remarkable to watch this team go to work, because it wasn't about the deep passes. It wasn't about Nico. It wasn't about anyone but Dylan Sampson in that front seven. And then on the other side, that offensive line just dominating the point of attack and really just imposing their will. Now, they got plenty coming up. Now, it is manageable, the schedule they have. They go to Oklahoma in a couple of weeks, another team we'll talk about later. Alabama at home, at UGA. They have plenty of games that are going to be a little bit worrisome, but let's say they go 1-2 in those games. Let's say they lose to Alabama and UGA, although I think that Alabama game they might be favored in, but let's just say they lose those two games and beat Oklahoma. They're into the playoff. There's no doubt about that. This is a really good team, and it's one of those teams that has that win that you need in that playoff room. Now they can say, well, they beat NC State away from home and were able to beat them in dominating fashion. That's going to mean something when it comes around to Selection Saturday. Or Selection Sunday. I can promise you that. There's going to be so many people talking about this game for quite some time to come, especially if NC State can put together a great performance the rest of the year. So overall, Tennessee, you're off running. CFP is very, very much in conversation for this team, and they are going to be as dangerous as they come in the SEC going forward. And then you just got to hope that NC State holds up their end of the bargain and doesn't just fall off a cliff after this one and loses all of the credibility of that win. But we'll obviously figure that out as the time goes on. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a twofer for you guys. We'll get to Nebraska just dominating Colorado for much of that game, and then Iowa State winning in comeback fashion. Kind of two very different games, honestly, but let's cover them right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC,
fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Tennessee just absolutely handling NC State over there in Charlotte, 51-10, just dominating performance, and Tennessee officially a CFP contender, and they might not look back on a defense than they have been in past years, and that's all the difference you need on a Josh Heupel team, I can promise you that. But now let's get into some other games. Nebraska just rolled over Colorado. Iowa State staged one of the greatest comebacks in Cyhawk history, so I want to get into two of these games, two very different games to be fair, but very fun games nonetheless. Nebraska wins 28-10 in Lincoln, a huge win for this program, one that you could feel it in that crowd. They really wanted this one. They were able to get it done. A huge performance from all of the players really on the team, but particularly that defense was just suffocating for all of this game. Dominating performance and baited Shedeur into some really bad passes. And there were a number of different things to pull away from this game. I think when you look at this, it couldn't have been uglier for Colorado for much of this game. I think Matt Rule and Nebraska did exactly what they wanted to do. They got out to an early lead, and then they ran the ball to victory. That's the way that they want to go about business. That's the way that a lot of Matt Rule teams go about business in the past, and it's been a winning formula thus far. So really, really impressive to be able to just kind of push on their neck after they get that first initial win, after they get that first initial punch. They were able to just keep punching throughout this game. It was really, really impressive to watch Nebraska just control this one. It wasn't about, putting up a ton of points. It wasn't about showboating. It wasn't about blowing them out. It was about getting out there with a win. And that's what Matt Rule is about. And it was really impressive and this was a Matt Rule win. It was very, very interesting to watch because it happens every time that Matt Rule takes over a team where they just turn into a very, very clean team. That's all they do. They don't do anything spectacular. They don't have ridiculous athletes or anything. They just make the right play when they need to make it. So it was really awesome to watch these two teams go to work. But how Nebraska won this one, pretty simple, to be totally honest with you. Mistake-free play was the biggest thing. Dylan Raiola went 23 for 30, 185 yards, a touchdown, but most importantly, no picks. That is the biggest thing here, where you were walking into a game where you were bigger, you were stronger, you had more talent on the defensive side of the ball by a margin, and you had the ability to essentially just run the ball to victory. You just can't make mistakes on the other side, and they did not. Now, penalties were a little bit of an issue that they'll have to figure out down the road, but overall, when you have two turnovers compared to you get two turnovers compared to giving up 0, you're going to have a lot of success against this Colorado team, just plain and simple. And then run the ball. They just went to work on the ground, and it really wasn't anything overly crazy. They ran for 149 yards, 4.3 yards per carry, so it wasn't like they beat them over the head and just dominated them on the ground. What they did is they chewed up clock. 10 more minutes of time and possession for Nebraska than Colorado in this game. We talked about it last week. Keeping that offense on the sideline is the way you go to work on this Colorado team, and man, did they. They did a great job of that, and Colorado only had 16 yards rushing in comparison. So they're Colorado. And then finally, they got after Shedeur, and this is something that is going to be a theme throughout the Big 12 schedule because there are a lot of good defensive linemen that they're going to have to go up against that are going to feast. I can just honestly promise you that. But last year he got sacked 8 times. This year he got sacked 6 times. So technically an improvement, but not nearly where you need to be for this guy to succeed. And I think there were a number of different plays throughout this game where that showed. I think even the pick that he threw that was just one of the most bizarre play calls I've ever seen in my entire life, if I'm being totally honest. The idea of a quarterback having his feet in the end zone and throwing a button hook all the way across the field is just beyond stupid, but that's beside the point. A million different things in that play just should not have happened, including the play call, the decision making, and everything in between. But at the end of the day, it was one of those things that Nebraska knew what they had to do. They knew that they were the more physical team. They knew they were they were the stronger team. So what they did was they got out to an early lead. They ran the ball down the stretch, and then supposed to do. And Matt Rule has to feel really good about that because it was a really impressive performance, and it was a Matt Rule performance more than anything else. So where does Colorado go from here? The problem with this, and Colorado is a team that has a really good quarterback. They have Travis Hunter, who in my opinion is the best player in college football. The book is out on them. That's the problem. It's not about, how many athletes you have on one side of the ball. It's not about the talent or the name recognition that you have. It's about just, you can't run the ball. You have no ability to run the ball. The offensive line is not as good as people wanted it to be. The defensive line is not going to get there against elite offensive lines that they're going to face in the Big 12. And every other Big 12 team is just going to do what Nebraska did in this game. They're just going to sit back. They're going to dare you to run the ball. They're not going to run the ball because they don't have a run game to speak of. And then Shedeur is going to make one or two mistakes throughout this game, and then you just run the ball to victory. That's the plain and simple. That's the way that you beat Colorado, and a lot of Big 12 teams can do that. Pretty much every single Big 12 team can do that, especially with the way that they've been playing defense over the past little bit. You talk about all of these air raid offenses, all of these teams that pass the ball all the time in the Big 12 that cause so many problems for Big 12 defenses for such a long time. That's no longer the case. They've started to drop 8 in coverage. They started to make things a lot tougher for those air raid offenses, and if Colorado's going to come in throwing the ball that often, they're not necessarily an air raid, quote-unquote, but if they're going to throw the ball that often, the Big 12 is going to tear them to pieces, just plain and simple. This Colorado team lost that game when Shedeur threw that pick because the body language right after that was just a disaster. So it gives you the blueprint. If you're a team in the Big 12 and you can go out there and punch Colorado in the teeth first, you're probably going to win that game, just plain and simple. And it's not an indictment necessarily on Colorado or Dion or anything. What it is this team is very simple. To beat this team, you have a very simple formula. You just got to execute, and Nebraska did an incredible job of doing that on Saturday. As for Nebraska, just go win. You have a couple of games coming up that could get a little bit sketchy here. I think they have at Illinois, they have Rutgers, at Indiana, so it's not like they have the easiest games in the world, but I don't want to say should, but hypothetically, you should be 7-0 going into that Ohio State game. Things can happen. It is college football, no doubt about that. But as of right now, this was the game that I was looking at saying maybe they could fall in that one. Maybe at Indiana is another one to watch. Illinois just played really good football this past weekend. But overall, I think you look at this team, they should be 7-0 walking into that Ohio State game, and then who knows what happens. It's one of those teams that a lot of doors opened on Saturday, and it's a team necessarily think is going to make the playoff, but as of right now, it's hard for me to say that they can't. That's for sure. So a really dominating performance. Huge props to Matt Rule and that group. And as for the Colorado team, they got a lot to figure out, and they've had a lot to figure out for a number of years, and they look right where they were when they started. So it's hard for me to say this is a much better team. I think they're a team that is roughly the exact same, but they got more names to watch, that's for sure. So I guess that's cool, but at the end of the day, it's the same exact results as a year ago. Moving on to Iowa State, Iowa. This was a fun game. No two ways about that. Iowa State, Iowa is always a really fun one, the Cy-Hawk Trophy, but we got some points in this one, and we didn't get them till the second half, really, with Iowa State, but Iowa State did a really good job in this game. This was one where Iowa did exactly what they wanted to do in the first half, handled them on defense, did what they needed to do on offense, although there were a couple of missed opportunities in terms of playing complementary football in the early parts of this game for Iowa, and being able to possibly put away this game did not happen. So it was one of those things that you left the door open for Iowa State, and Jalen Noel and Rocco Beck took full advantage. So there's so many different things to take away from this game. I think the Iowa offense, you're better. You still have big-time issues. You were given the ball at the Iowa State 12 after an INT and had to settle for 3 points. That might have been the game right there. If you're able to put that ball in the end zone, then you win this game and you walk out feeling really good about the rest of your season, but you left the door open and Iowa State took full advantage. So How they won, halftime adjustments is the most obvious answer in the world. They were down 13-0 going into halftime, were down 19-7 in the third quarter, and still finding a way to win is absolutely huge. I mean, the defense also tightened up, forcing a punt or turnover on all but one possession in the second half, and that possession was pretty early on in the second half. So really incredible job by Matt Campbell and this defensive staff. Did an incredible job of game planning and executing that game plan, because it was weird. We were coming into this game, Iowa, you felt like if you can stop that run game, you have a shot. Well, they stopped the pass game and did a really good job of doing that. Cade McNamara went 13 for 29, 99 yards, 0 touchdowns, 2 picks. And there's one of those things where Caleb Jackson is a great player. He's absolutely incredible. One of the better running backs in the country. He can't do it all himself. So you can put as much on him as you would like. At the end of the day, if you have no passing game to put along with it, you're not going to be successful. So it was one of those things where you felt like they might have to take away the run game. You take away one or the other, you're probably in pretty good shape regardless, because one-dimensional offenses tend to struggle a lot. But at the end of the day, the biggest thing to me was they made big plays when they needed them. They had a couple of plays down the stretch of this game that made all of the difference. We talked about how they went down 19-7. The very next play was a 75-yard touchdown to Jalen Noel, and it brought them right back into this game. A huge play by Rocco Becht and Jalen Noel, and Jalen Noel really just took over this game in the second half. And then in the back end of this game, when they were going down trying to hit a game-winning field goal, 30-yard pass down the sideline to Jalen Noel, which I loved the play call on, by the way. It was absolutely incredible that they very easily could have played pretty conservative, thrown out routes, kept everything in the just kept everything very comfortable. They let Rocco Becht be Rocco Becht, and they let him throw the ball the way he's comfortable throwing the ball, which is kind of slinging the ball all around the field. He's a very, very instinctive quarterback and one of those guys that if he's in a rhythm, just don't take him out of it. Don't have him start dumping the ball down. Don't have him start, throwing those layups, because at the end of the day, he's going to have to make those big throws, and man, did he down the stretch of this one. But where does Iowa go from here is a very interesting question, because they're Iowa. It's hard for me to say that this is much of a different team than they've had the past couple of years. I do think they're better offensively. I think they have more playmakers on the outside to make plays. But at the end of the day, Iowa State is not Iowa's going to face, especially not the best back end. So they're going to have to figure out some stuff. And at the end of the day, they have so many different things going for them. But they have a chance to still win most of the rest of the games on their schedule. They do have Minnesota, Michigan State, Washington, Wisconsin, but at the end of the day, there's a world where they roll the rest of the way and they're meeting Nebraska at the end of the season for a spot in the CFP. I know that sounds a little crazy, and frankly, I tend to believe they're going to fall at some point in that mess of the Big Ten, but it's definitely a possibility that this team could just ride their defense the way they have the last however long they've rode their defense, but it's one of those teams that has a lot in front of them. They still can do a lot of things, but it's Iowa. I tend to believe that there's going to be a stumble along the way, and they're just not going to be able to get there. But overall, for Iowa State side, this was the moment to me, and I think it was one of those things where Iowa State was waiting for that thing to kind of galvanize this team, let them know that they can play on the highest level, that they can win a Big 12 title. This was it. A team that was down 13 going into halftime, that was down 12 late in this game, being able to come back and being able to make those plays down the stretch has to give you all the confidence in the world. And now you head into a really, really tough stretch of the season. Big 12 play is always going to be really weird, but especially this year with so many teams wrapped around each other, it's going to be really tough for this team. But at the end of the day, they have so much going for them. They have so many different weapons on the outside. They have a really, really confident quarterback that we have shown in this past game. He has incredible resiliency. So overall, I think they're a team that can win the Big 12. They have Utah, I believe, at the second to last week of the season. So they got plenty ahead of them, no doubt about that. But they officially are a team that absolutely is in the Big 12 conversation, along with probably just about every other team in the Big 12, frankly, right about now. But it's going to be awesome to watch these two teams develop, as well as Nebraska and Colorado. I think when you look at Nebraska, the sky's the limit as of right now. If they're going to play that level of football every single weekend, they're going to be able to win a lot of games. And then on the Colorado side, it's the Colorado team that we've all known. It's hard for me to sit here and say that they are much better in any of the places that they needed to get much better in for them to be more successful this year. I do think that they can still get to 6 wins just purely based off that talent level, but overall, I mean, just a remarkably disappointing performance and one that Colorado has seen before. It's the exact same formula as it was a year ago to beat them, and you just roll with that into year 2 for Dion. So they got stuff to figure out. There's no two ways about that, but let's see if they do. It'll be interesting to watch the rest of the season, but as of right now, I'm not necessarily loving the rest of their schedule. I can promise you that. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about upsets. NIU just pulled off a stunner in South Bend this past weekend, and then we had some more Group of 5 teams give some teams some scares. They didn't necessarily fall in those games, but definitely kept some teams on the edge of their seats for a little bit longer than they were hoping. So we'll talk about that right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Nebraska just dismantling Colorado for much of that game, and then Iowa State staging a big-time comeback to win the Cy-Hawk Trophy this year for the first time in quite some time, or at least for the first, I believe they lost 8 out of the last 9, if I'm not mistaken, but we're able to get this one done, and a huge win for the Cyclones there, but it was wild. It was one of those games that you did not think you had to tune into, and then you looked up around the fourth quarter and said, okay, well, I guess this has to go on the main TV, because this one was insane from start to finish, and it was one of those games that it just can't happen. There's no two ways to put it. I mean, Notre Dame has this happen just about once a year, where they lose a game that they have no business losing, that they were either up in late or they were just way better of a team than the team that was coming in. They lost to Stanford and Marshall a couple of years ago, lost a game to Louisville a year ago where they gave away a lead. There were so many monikers to show you. There were so many monikers to show you that this was going to be a team that was going to have this type of trouble. They were going to have these games where they play incredible football one week, they play terrible football the next. So it's a indictment on this program. It's an indictment on that coaching staff that you just can't get your guys ready for these games, and you can't get them ready on a consistent basis, and it's a huge worry for this team going forward. But they didn't just get, beat because some crazy things happened and one thing went one direction. No, they got beat. They got outgained by 100 yards. NIU had a better third down percentage, had more yards per pass, had more time of possession, won the turnover margin. They did everything in this game. So it wasn't like Notre Dame gave this one away. NIU beat them. They walked onto the field in South Bend and beat them. And Antonio Brown was a huge reason for that. Had 22 touches, 225 yards, and a touchdown in this game. This kid was special. He was the difference in this game and was just outright impossible for Notre Dame to get a beat on. And then on the other side of things, I think Notre Dame's got issues. There's no two ways to put it. I mean, this is a team that has so many problems on the offensive line. They're one of 5 FBS teams that doesn't have a passing touchdown up until this point. This is one of those games that just should knock you out of the college football playoff contention. I understand that if they run the table, they'll probably get in, but another reason why I think the 12-team playoff is just dumb. This is a game that should bury you. This is a game that you should not be able to recover from, and this is a game that, frankly, should never happen to Notre Dame. So when it does happen, we should punish them accordingly, which is you are no longer in the playoff. Plain and simple. I don't care if Notre Dame runs the table. I don't care if they beat everyone by 50. This is a game that they had to win. This is a game that they were coming off one of the bigger wins in week 1, and they walked into their own stadium and got beat by a team that is weaker, that is not as strong, that is less big, that is less talented, that should be worse coached, and all of these different things. That should knock them out of the playoff. Period. End of story. That's one of the reasons I just hate the 12 team is Notre Dame can still strap them up next week, and if they go undefeated the rest of the way, they're probably in your 12-team playoff. They should not be. Plain and simple. all the respect in the world to NIU. No disrespect at all to NIU in this, but come on. Notre Dame cannot lose this game and still be a playoff team. Just plain and simple. They are not an elite team in this college football world, and they do not deserve a chance to play for the national title. So I don't know what happens from here. Frankly, I think Notre Dame is going to lose another one, so it won't necessarily be a problem. But even if they don't, I don't want to see them in the playoff. This is not a top 12 team in the country. This is not a team that deserves to be playing for a chance to win a national title. Period. End of story. On the other side of things, NIU, huge shout out to NIU and Thomas Hammock. He's a former player in that program and just got them their biggest win in history. So just so cool, always incredible to watch these really awesome stories unfold throughout the college football season, and this is the biggest one so far. So incredible performance from NIU. For Notre Dame, I don't know, figure it out. They have so many problems up there when it comes to coaching, when it comes to getting these guys ready for these games that for whatever reason they feel entitled to win, that I don't know. Regardless of what they do going forward, do not let them into the playoff. They do not deserve a chance to play for a national title. But that's beside the point. Let's move on to Penn State and Bowling Green, because this was a gross game. There's no two ways about that. Penn State did a very, very bad job of playing complementary football throughout this game. And then in the first half, it was all the offense doing incredible things, but then the defense couldn't stop anything. In the second half, it was a lot of the offense just not doing anything on third down, and the defense having to bow up and make big-time plays down the stretch. So in the second half, I think this offense had a ton of third down missed opportunities, went 2 for 9 on third down in this game, had 7 penalties for 76 yards. Drew Aller threw a pick in the end zone that could have made it look a lot better if that wasn't a pick. A million things went wrong for Penn State. So unlike that NIU game with Notre Dame, this was one that Penn State kind of gave away just a little bit. I think Bowling Green played a really good game, but at the end of the day, you won. So I guess you're able to move on. You're able to feel okay about that and be able to kind of fix some of the issues going forward. But they got another MAC opponent next week against Kent State, and it's one of those games that you probably will overlook, and you probably should to a certain extent. But at the end of the day, if Bowling Green's going to give Penn State a problem, maybe Kent State can come in there and do the exact same thing. But I do think Penn State is going to hit the ground rolling. I do think they're still a really good team. I just think this is a little bit of a hangover from week one, as we talked about last week. So not overly worried about this one, but definitely some things in here that make you just the slightest bit worried about what Penn State can do consistently throughout this year. Oregon escaped in this game. This was a game that, frankly, if you rewatch it, you'd be surprised that Boise State was not able to get this one done, because Boise State is awesome, and they do have the best running back in the country. If you don't think that, then hush. Ashton Jeanty is absolutely different in every single way, so that's the best running back in the country. I'm not willing to have a conversation otherwise. But if it wasn't for 2 special teams plays in this game, Oregon loses, plain and simple. There's no two ways about that. They got a punt return from Tez Johnson, 85 yards to the end zone to give Oregon a 7-point lead in this game, and frankly, that should have been the knockout punch, but it wasn't. And then Noah Whittington returned a kick to the 1-yard line and then decided to drop it, and then they got a quick recovery, which was just incredible play by number 27, don't know his name, but at the end of the day, he might have just saved their season with picking up that ball as quickly as he did, because Noah Whittington absolutely dropped that ball before the end zone, and just stop doing that. I genuinely, every time I see it, I don't understand how that happens. Just hold it until you get in the end zone. It's not the hardest thing in the world. It's the craziest thing that happens on a consistent basis in college football. So Noah Whittington, hopefully he learns from that, but Oregon dodged a huge bullet in this game, and they still have issues. The O-line was not good in this game. Boise State got after Dylan Gabriel a lot in this game, and the run game had really nothing going. And then on the other side, you were facing a player that is just magic. Ashton Jeanty was just incredible in this game. 25 carries, 192 yards, 3 touchdowns. Did have a big-time touchdown to, I believe, tie this game late to give Boise State a shot. But this is the best player in the country right now. This is my Heisman favorite, and I understand what Quinn Ewers did in Ann Arbor was absolutely remarkable. No one is playing better football right now than Ashton Jeanty. I feel very confident in saying that, and I think he's one of those guys that it's incredible to watch this guy play football. Frankly, the fact that he stayed at Boise State is outright insane, and I'd love to see what some of the NIL deals were to get him out of Boise. But at the end of the day, Oregon did get the win. They did just enough, and you still have some big-time questions. They go to Oregon State this weekend. They have UCLA. They have Michigan State before Ohio State comes to town. So they got a lot of stuff to figure out. If they're playing this level of football, they won't even be undefeated when Ohio State comes to town, much less being that started the season very, very slow and you're asking a ton of questions about. Still a very capable team, but a lot of the holes are, carrying over week to week, and that is the big-time worry for this team. Let's move over to Kansas State. This is another one that they escaped in this one. Tulane's offense made it really, really tough for Kansas State in this game, and frankly, I think they could make it tough for just about everyone in the country, but in the first half, they were outright rolling on offense for Tulane, but Kansas State just controlled the second half, outscoring Tulane 24-7, forcing multiple turnovers, including the scoop and score that was the difference in the game, so Kansas State did enough. They went about their business pretty much the way that they would want to. Now, there were a couple of mistakes in there, but got to 200 yards rushing. Avery Johnson had 2 passing touchdowns and no INTs, so it went probably as smoothly as you would like on the offensive side of the ball. It was just Tulane had enough on the other side that they could match it. The defense has things to figure out. There's no doubt about that. I think this Tulane offense is awesome, but at the end of the day, Kansas State should be able to stop Tulane at least more consistently than they were in the first half. So it's going to be interesting to watch this team develop. I think Kansas State, I'm not necessarily holding too much against them in this game. Obviously, I think Tulane's going to be great because I have them in my playoff, but at the end of the day, I think it's one of those games where you came out a little bit sluggish. That's all well and good. They finished the job against a good group of 5 team away from home, so I'm not going to hold it against Kansas State by any means. Tulane and Boise State have set themselves up in a really good spot for the CFP. There's no doubt about that. Frankly, I think they're playing second fiddle to UNLV right about now, but I think Tulane has another huge opportunity this upcoming weekend against OU that we'll get to them in a second, but there's attackable areas in that OU team. And then KSU has an out-of-conference game against Arizona on Friday, so a couple of big-time matchups for these teams coming up, and we'll see how they handle them, but definitely a big-time win for Kansas away from home against a really good group of 5 teams. So although this one would have been not great if they lost it, I do think winning it the way they did was plenty impressive for me, honestly. And then this is one that probably shouldn't be on here. I understand that Alabama won this one 42-16. It looked a lot better at the end of it. It was 14-13 going into the fourth quarter. And to be fair, the great teams turn it on when they need to. They win those games, and that's exactly what Alabama did. So no disrespect to Alabama by any means, but there are issues on this team. The O-line is a downright issue, and it's something that I did not think was going to be the problem with this team, but it really is. USF was living in the backfield of Alabama for 3.5 quarters of this game. Milroe was running for his life and never really got comfortable. On the other side of the ball, the defense had a really good day. The defense was all over the place, and I love this Kane Womack defense more and more every single week, but Jahad Campbell is playing the position he was meant to play, which is essentially just no position. The dude is so athletic, he's so dynamic that just putting him out there on the edge and letting him go make plays is the best way to go about business. I think Justin Jefferson was a great addition to that linebacker room. USF went 2 for 18 on third down throughout this game. So a really remarkable performance from this Alabama defense. They did have 13 penalties for 120 yards, 3 fumbles, just so many mistakes for this team that just cannot happen against better opponents. So it's one of those things that I talked about it going into this game, that Alabama throughout the next couple of weeks just cannot give UGA or Wisconsin anything. They just cannot give them a weakness to expose. They gave them a huge one. That offensive line is one that they're going to attack time and again, and it's one of those that I don't know if Wisconsin can take full advantage given the way that they've been playing, but UGA definitely can. So it's one of those things they're out very quickly, because if they play that caliber of football against UGA at home, they're losing by about 21 points, and they're asking a lot of questions about Kalen DeBoer after that game. But overall, I mean, there were so many incredible upset bids, but NIU was the one that was able to get it done. Huge shout out to Thomas Hammock and that team. Just an incredible moment. You saw the emotion on his face after the game, and you saw how much it meant to him. It's one of those moments that make college football special. So huge shout out to NIU, huge shout out to the Huskies. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a week 1 whip around. We'll go through the rest of the top 25 teams. I believe we have 8 games here to cover for you guys, so we'll get to those teams right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the upset bids, including NIU knocking off Notre Dame in South Bend. Just one of those things for Notre Dame. You can almost bet on it annually they will lose a game that they have no business losing, and this was that one. Maybe there will be another one down the stretch, but as of right now, they have a lot of questions in South Bend, I can promise you that. But let's get into this last segment here, and we're just going to do a little bit of a whip around, and we got to start with Utah. They had a big-time win, 23-12 over Baylor. This was an out-of-conference game, just to remind everyone. Definitely a very weird one, but this was out of conference. We'll have another one on Friday with Kansas State, Arizona. That will be out of conference as well before we get into Big 12 play. But Utah gets the wins. It could have been much worse, but at the end of the day, Cam Rising left with an injury, and he hurt his throwing hand on a late hit out of bounds that was not that great. I did not like that one bit, but at the end of the day, they are without him for the time being. Isaac Wilson, the brother of Zach Wilson, took over at quarterback, and it was stagnant. There's no other way to put it, and frankly, I would not expect anything different from a young kid making his appearance against a Dave Aranda defense. So nothing against him at all. I think he's one of those kids that's going to be really talented, but he got thrown into the fire in this one. The Utah defense just controlled this game, holding Baylor to barely over 200 yards, 3 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, just all over the place, including a blocked field goal return for a touchdown. So they dominated pretty much all 3 phases of this game, but you just got to keep coming back to Cam Rising. They absolutely need that kid. There's no two ways about that. They need him on the field, and they need him healthy. And they got Oklahoma State in a couple of weeks. And if Isaac Wilson is the guy trotting out into Stillwater to play that game, I can almost promise you that's going to be a loss. I think Isaac Wilson is a very talented quarterback and will be very good in time, but I don't think he can handle that. I'm just being totally honest. Cam Rising, I think, is one of those guys that he's probably okay. He did give a thumbs up to the crowd when they asked if that means anything to you guys, but at the end of the day, we'll keep you updated on everything you need to know, because Utah is a team that if he is on the field, they can win pretty much anything in front of them. If he is not on the field, they're going to have a tough time even getting in Big 12 contention. So they got to figure it out very quickly. They got to hope that he's more healthy, and I just hate it for the kid more than anything else, because he's put in so much work to get back to where he is, and to have it taken away because of a dumb play more than anything else, it just got to be really annoying. But at the end of the day, hopefully he's healthy in a couple of weeks here and they can hit the ground running, and this doesn't have a long-term effect. But every time he goes down, you just hate to see that headline roll across your Twitter page. But moving on to Oklahoma, they escaped on Saturday, and this was a game that I pegged that was going to be close, and it really was. It was a little bit closer than I was expecting, frankly, but Oklahoma has an O-line problem. There's really no other way to put it. This is a Houston front that is good. This is a Houston front that is not great and not even close to what Tennessee is going to have in a couple of weeks, what Texas is going to have in the Red River rivalry, what Alabama is going to have later on in the season. They have a problem, and if they don't fix it quickly, they're going to get torn to pieces in the SEC, just being totally honest, and it's going to start in that Tennessee game where they just go to work on this team. But they do have a really good defense. They were able to hold Houston, were able to get a safety late in this game to save them, really. But at the end of the day, ran for 78 total yards, 2.8 yards per carry. Jackson Arnold was under fire the entire game and was off the mark on a number of throws because of it. It felt like he was one of those guys that you're standing back there and you're just expecting someone to get through, so you try to get rid of the ball just a little bit too quickly. It was clunky at times, that is for sure, and it's one of those big-time worries that once you have a young quarterback mixed with a not-so-great offensive line, some of those mistakes that could not be as aggressive become very amplified very quickly. So Jackson Arnold could be one of those guys that leaves a lot on the table, and it wouldn't be his fault by any means. So 7 of OU's points came off a turnover inside Houston's 10-yard line. So for 42 minutes of this game, they were absolutely down. And for 42-plus minutes, the only points that Oklahoma scored were a safety towards the end of this game that gave them the win. So it was gross. There's no two ways about that. Oklahoma has really, really big problems to fix, and if they don't fix them before Tennessee comes to town, it's going to look a lot like that NC State game. It might look a little bit better because that defense on the other side is so good and one of the best defenses in the entire SEC, but at the end of the day, this was gross, and it's one of those things that Oklahoma fans had these worries coming in. They're being amplified more and more as we get throughout this game, or throughout this season. Moving forward to their former rival, their real rival that they should be playing every year. Oklahoma State beats Arkansas in double overtime 39-31. This one was crazy, and I have never seen a team try to lose a game quite as hard as Arkansas did in this game. It was remarkable to watch the mistakes that happened for Arkansas down the stretch. They were up 21-7 at halftime. Then to start the half, they went punt, fumble, missed field goal in the game. It was just terrible from Arkansas in the early parts of the second half. And then shout out to Alan Bowman. He made every play that you needed him to make throughout this game. You know, Ollie Gordon was fully in check. 17 carries, 48 yards, got a touchdown, but overall, Arkansas just bottled him up all day. And Alan Bowman made the necessary plays. Didn't necessarily put up gaudy numbers by any means, but definitely did what they needed him to do and was really, really impressive for me. But overall, on the other side of the ball, this was the moment for Sam Pittman. I think there was a moment early on in this game where you were thinking, man, if they can win this one, they get a ranked win over Oklahoma State, they move into SEC play, maybe feeling a little bit more confident. They have some playmakers with Taylon Green and Jaquindon Jackson and Andrew Armstrong. They have guys. Maybe they can make some noise, and then it all came to a screeching halt very quickly. So it's one of those teams that you knew it wasn't going to be a pretty season. You knew it wasn't going to be great, but at the end of the day, they have 5 ranked teams ahead of them. 4 of them are in the top 7, so it could get really ugly. But Jaquindon Jackson and Andrew Armstrong are absolute dudes, so maybe you can win a couple of games here and there that you don't expect to win, but at the end of the day, this is a game that Arkansas should have won, and the fact that they didn't might just send them on a very bad downward spiral. Moving on to LSU, this is one I won't waste too much time on because at the end of the day, LSU was able to win this one pretty comfortably, but they did pull away in the fourth quarter. I believe this was a 2-point game going into that fourth quarter, and they were able to get it done, but this defense still has problems. They were able to let a couple of guys get loose on some big plays, and more than anything, that was really the extent of it for that defense, so not necessarily too aggressive of a bad job by this defense, but there were a couple of really, really bad moments in terms of just run fits and getting just blocked off the line. Also, the run game can't get going. And this is one of the best offensive lines in the entire country. The fact that they can't run the ball is just outright insane. They should not be in this position, and it shouldn't be on Garrett Nussmeier to make every single play. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. They do go to South Carolina where game day is going this upcoming weekend, and those 2 tackles against that pass rush is going to be really fun to watch. I can promise you that. But overall, LSU gets a pretty comfortable win, but still has some of those issues that you saw last year, and they're fixed a little bit, but not to the extent that you want them to be going into SEC play. Illinois got a huge win over Kansas this weekend, 23-17. Really impressive win from Illinois in this one, and it was kind of a back-and-forth affair until you went to the fourth quarter, and then it belonged to Illinois. In that quarter, the possessions went Kansas punt, Illinois touchdown, Kansas punt, Illinois field goal. That was almost a 7-minute drive, and then a Kansas fumble to finish off the game. So it was really impressive, Illinois' closing ability in this game. Luke Altmaier did exactly what you need him to do, which is just execute. It doesn't need to be pretty. It doesn't need to be perfect. He doesn't need to make the Caleb Williams type plays. He just needs to put the ball downfield. He just needs to put the ball on target, and he found Zachary Franklin a ton in this game, and that's a very talented player for Illinois that could cause problems for just about any defensive backfield in the entire country, and man did he against Kansas this weekend. For Kansas, had Jalen Daniels give up the ball 4 times. That just can't happen. If you're going to win games, Jalen Daniels is a guy that needs the ball in his hands, so if he's going to give the ball up 4 times, you are not going to win a lot of games, and it's one of those things that you have a really good run game. Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw are going to be fantastic for you. You're not going to beat a lot of the Big 12 teams you need to beat down the stretch if you can't do both, and if you can't take care of the football especially. So that's something they're going to have to figure out. One of the worst performances from Jalen Daniels we've seen in quite some time, but overall, a huge win for Illinois. Kansas, still plenty ahead of you, still plenty to figure out for sure, but at the end of the day, still everything on the table for Kansas, and Illinois maybe a little bit more on the table than we once thought. Arizona escaped Northern Arizona in this game, and they have a really big-time issue. They have Kansas State this upcoming Friday, and the script to beat Arizona is just about as simple as there is a script around the country, because it's the reality of stop T-Mac. If you can stop T-Mac, you win that game. He had 2 catches, 11 yards in this game, and the only reason Northern Arizona was not able to win was They didn't have the athletes to win. I promise you the Big 12 does. So if the Big 12 can stop T-Mac, which is easier said than done, but frankly, if Northern Arizona can do it, then I would bet Iowa State can do it. I would bet Kansas State can do it. So at the end of the day, if that's the way it's going to be, Arizona's not going to win a lot of games, plain and simple. If that's the only offense you really have to speak of, Quali Conley has played really good football and was their leading rusher in this game, but was also their leading receiver in this game. So they still don't have another wide receiver option, and if you can take that one guy out of the game for Arizona, you're likely in a really good spot to win, which was what Northern Arizona was for a long time, but the defense played well enough for Arizona to win that one. But it's clear for every other Big 12 team out there that is about to play this team, you know exactly what you have to do, and if you do it, you have a pretty good chance to beat this Wildcat team. Syracuse got a huge win over Georgia Tech, and this was the Kyle McCord show. 32 for 46, 381, 4 touchdowns, just went to work on this Georgia Tech back end, and had some choice words on the sideline if you saw that. But at the end of the day, this is one of those games where it started bad, so Tech was in a really bad spot. Tech is not a team that is going to be able to come back from behind. They are very monotonous. They, chip away at you. They break you by, or they kill you by a million paper cuts. They don't go down the field. They don't make those big explosive plays. So Syracuse able to get out in front of them made all the difference in this game. So huge shout out to Syracuse. I think when you look at this game, they dominated pretty much from start to finish. Georgia Tech was able to get a couple of crazy drives towards the end of this game to make it look a little bit better, but at the end of the day, this Syracuse team is putting together a really good early part of the season, and I think with Kyle McCord playing this confident in the football, they have a chance to make some noise. Now, they still have NC State, Virginia Tech, Miami, Boston College on the schedule, but let's say they can definitely beat 3 of those teams. Let's say they beat 3 of those teams. They might just be in the ACC title. So a crazy, crazy thing to talk about. But Syracuse, maybe Kyle McCord was the only thing missing from this team. And Fran Brown coming over has made all of the difference. And I'm sure he will send Ryan Day even more gifts after this week because that guy is downright special over there in Syracuse, at least right now. And then to finish it out, I talked about this one last week, and I made a prediction that Clemson was going to win this game, but they were going to struggle to find their offense. What a dummy I am, because Clemson went to work on offense in this game, and it's not necessarily saying that they're going to be able to go to work the rest of the season, but K. Klubnik had 2 incompletions. He had 5 passing touchdowns. Phil Moffa had 118 on the ground on 10 carries. Bryant Wesco had 130 and a touchdown. Jay Burningstool had 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. Everyone got into the play, and everyone made really good plays in this game. Now, this is not necessarily the elite App State team that didn't performance, and it begs a couple of different questions. Is Clemson okay on offense? Do they have all the guys that they need to? I think they're a little bit better, and I think Bryant Wesco coming along is going to be huge for this team. But at the end of the day, they still got some things they have to figure out. And if they play that NC State game in 2 weeks and look incredible on offense, then I'm on board. But as of right now, I'm still a little bit skeptical. And then the other question is, how good is UGA? Because they dismantled this Clemson team. And then Clemson, I don't know if it was an energy thing. I don't know if it was an anger thing. I don't know if there was more at play than just them being that much better than App State. But if that's how good Georgia is, then good luck everyone else. Just plain and simple. I mean, if they're going to beat a team that goes to work like this on a Saturday, 34-3, it's a terrifying team. So overall, there's a ton of takeaways, but maybe the biggest one is Georgia's downright terrifying the rest of the year, as they have been for the past quite some time. And as for Ole Miss, Missouri, Miami, USC, Louisville, all your fans, don't be mad at me. Your team just really took care of business. I did not need to waste time on your team because they're just going about their business the way that they should be. So overall, an incredible week 2. And we will continue into tomorrow talking about all the games because we didn't even get to Cal Auburn. That was absolutely crazy. We didn't even get to South Carolina just dismantling Kentucky at home. So we have plenty others to get to throughout the rest of the week. But that'll do it for today, at least, for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So you're a basketball guy, you're a football guy, you're a football gal. Anything you need, we absolutely have you covered on the GSMC Sports page. So come on over and we will totally have you covered everything in the world of sports. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you tomorrow for more reactions from the Week 2 slate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.